The more you listen, the more you know. This is Good Politics with Dr. Wilson and Adam Whiteman.
Welcome back. You're here with Dr. Wilson and Adam Whiteman. We've had some pretty cool stuff. Finally, we're not covering impeachment.
Right. So this is where we're going to go now. We're going to talk about the economy. We got an election going on. It's a presidential year election, and the economy is always a big thing. And what's nice about it is we've got some data that's come in that's year-end data. So there's a whole lot to get into with the economy. The issue is how this economy is doing and whether that's going to make a difference. To start us off, let's go into the jobs report, and let's play clip number 1.
I want to see a smile, Larry. I'm not seeing it yet. There you go. Okay. Go ahead. Take your victory lap, because I think that was a terrific jobs report.
Yeah, it's a blowout number. It's a blowout number, 225. And I just think that the economy is getting off on the right foot here in 2020.
Here's Kudlow saying he thinks we're getting off on the right foot, 2020. I can't forget that he is the cheerleader, especially for economics and stuff. Now, how do I really read these numbers?
Right, so that's our man, Kudlow. There's a couple of things that we want to talk about in this jobs report. I want to distinguish the report from the narrative. And it's very important to understand the difference, the jobs report, the jobs narrative. Now, when we're talking about the report, we're pretty much talking numbers. The number that started us off for this year was 225,000 new jobs. And you know from prior shows, that's an A. That's a good number. It's also a 3.6% unemployment rate. And you know from prior shows, that's an excellent number. But the interesting thing to talk about it is these revisions. I hope you understand that all this economic data came out, Adam, and there were so many revisions, substantial revisions, not just for a prior month, but a prior year. There were all these revisions also for 2018 that took away 500,000 total jobs in that whole year from Trump. So we've got to dig deep into these numbers and look at them. And to hear that, play clip 1.5.
This week we learned that job creation numbers reported by the Labor Department were off, like way off, by about 20%. 2 million jobs were created between April 2018 and March 2019. That's 500,000 fewer jobs than the estimates originally showed.
Wait. So these revisions brought down the numbers. I thought usually revisions increase the numbers. Am I reading this right?
They have month-to-month revisions, and then they did this thing this time where there's an end-of-the-year revision. So this was a much more substantial revision. It says here the Bureau's report includes benchmark revisions for April 2018 to March 2019 period. Usually those are relatively small, about 40 to 50,000. But this time the preliminary figures showed that they were gigantic, with 514,000 taken off the original tally. So we've got a new set of numbers. For people who want to watch reality and they equate reality with numbers, we do have to do an update because people want us to be accurate about what the numbers are. Here's what they show. I've taken President Obama, the last 4 years of his administration, his second term, 2013 through 2016, 4 years. I told you if you get 200,000 a month, that's an A. And the question is, can you do it for a full year? Here are his numbers. 2013, he's averaging 192,000. 2014, he's averaging 250. 2015, he's averaging 227. 2016, he's averaging 195. That is a total 4-year average of 216,000 jobs per month. Now, let's compare that with Trump. These have the revised numbers. This is over 3 years, 2017, 18, and 19, the first 3 years of his presidency. He's averaging 176,000 in 2017, 193 in 2018. That was the year of the tax cut. 175 in 2019 for a total average in the Trump administration of 181. So that means that President Obama has an A in job creation and President Trump has a B+. All right, he's averaging.
And this is average across their entire term.
Yes, this is a lot of data in here for that. Now, let's do this. I told you that the rate is 3.6%, and that is fantastic, right? Well, I want to expand the rate so that we look at how many months you can get in a row having 4.0 or less. So 4.0, 3.9, 3.8, 3.7. If it's 4.0 or less, Trump has 24 months in a row at that, which is pretty amazing. Clinton, on the other hand, only has 4 months. And there's been no other president in recent time that you have to go back to the 1960s in order to do that and to have any other point of comparison. In modern times, since globalism, in modern times, even Reagan doesn't have that. So Reagan never had a 3% employment rate.
Gotcha. So George Bush didn't perform at this level.
That's great. Look, let me just do it this way. I had always thought Clinton set the standard. We hadn't seen, I think what his was like 3.8 was the lowest, and that's right when he was going out the door. I thought, wow, So he only had a run of 4 months. This administration has 23 months at this. So this is actually a really good rate, a really good number. The interesting thing is, if I expand the test from 4.0, take it to 4.1 and use that as the ceiling, 4.1, 4.0, 3.9, 3.8, so 4.1 or below, the numbers do get a little bit interesting for Clinton. He goes up to 15, where Trump only goes up to 24. So Clinton starts to get competitive if we raise the standard just a touch. All right, let me switch now and talk about one other aspect of this report. Sometimes we like to talk about the rates for specific groups of people, and we're going to talk here about marginalized publics, the African American employment rate and the Hispanic rate. Now, I hope you understand when the employment rate goes down generally, you also see it go down for respective publics. But as you know, there's been all-time records that have been broken for certain publics. In this case, the African American rate got down to as low as 5.4 last year. That number is up now again to 6.0. And same with the Hispanic rate got down to 3.9, and it's up again to 4.3. But we have some data here that I want to show you. We'll put it up on the video. And as you can see, it looks to me like January usually records a higher number. In other words, as I eyeball these numbers, I seem to see January being large and then going down in the summer. And then the January that follows is up again. As you head toward the summer, it goes down. So in other words, as it trends downward, there seems to be some structure in these numbers. I'm not exactly sure why. They do try to seasonally adjust these things, but they're always trying to correct what their seasonal adjustment logic is. So I still see a small amount of structure here. Let me give that to you. The year before 2018, May was the lowest figure for African American unemployment, and then January started over as its own dynamic. And the same thing the year before 2017, January again is higher than the previous year's low. So I see a small amount of structure there. What I'm trying to say is nothing other than, hey, let's watch it. 6 is a lot higher than 5.4. So that number did peak up there. But we got to watch and see there may be a little bit of structure in this. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. So just eyeballing it, you can see some trends.
Right.
When I read this, I see, so for example, 2010 January, 16.5. This is the African American unemployment rate?
That's correct.
So, I mean, that's huge compared to by how much the Trump administration has broken those records.
Well,
quite a bit.
You know, the thing about it is, here's what I would watch for. When the employment rate goes down, it goes down for everyone. But what we're really looking for is the gap rate. We'd like to have a world where there's no difference. Why should we have to have a separate rate? You know, I mean, you'd like to see, you'd want that number to be equal, right?
Right.
And so closing the gap is something that's very important. What we have to watch for is whether this figure's at 6%. What I'm trying to say, this month is a bad number, Adam. That's what I'm trying to tell you. 6% in January, I'm not happy with that number. But what I'm hoping to see, and we have to watch, is to see whether or not there's some structure in this so that if this is January's high, because you see in January they tend to be higher, then that we can expect that number to fall. And that's what we have to watch for.
Outstanding.
What I want to do is talk a little bit about middle-class politics. There is this interesting argument about who is benefiting from this economy. You know, this is a presidential election year, so people are going to talk about the economy. And the argument takes two forms. If you listen to some people on the left, like Bernie, they seem to have this narrative about the economy that says it can't benefit you. You know what I mean? There's always some problem. There's the 2%, as they used to say back in the 1980s. Now he says it's the 1%. You'll get a lot of people talking about how this economy isn't working for you. For some of these people on the left, no matter what the indicators say, one gets the impression that it can't work, that the indicators are irrelevant. But that's exactly the opposite with what the party in power is saying. You listen to Kudlow, and a lot of time he's giving you just indicators. Oh, you have to be doing great. The indicator's great. Things are fine because it's 3.5, you silly. You know, so there's this interesting question about do the indicators matter? In Bernie's world, I don't think indicators ever matter. Whereas when you're in power and you have a 3.5 rate, you say the indicator shows everything's great. You know, it's like philosophy of what to do with the indicator.
And so the argument for the party not in power, like what Bernie might be saying, is like, okay, so sure, you know, maybe he's not even recognizing the economic indicators, but are you experiencing a good economy?
Right.
And so that's kind of the narrative. It takes away from the facts whether or not we're getting $5,000 more per household. If at the end of the day we're not feeling that, then we might still vote for Bernie, is what you're saying.
Right. We started off the show with this problem, right? Didn't we do a bunch of shows where we were looking at President Trump's average job creation for 2018, which was the year after the tax cut go into place. And we said, look, there was all these new jobs. And that got revised. And so it's funny, the indicator changes. And the question is, what are you pointing to? The indicator or something to extract from it? And so this is an interesting thing always to have to deal with. Sometimes you're talking about indicators, but there's a broad question of what they mean and what to make sense of it. And what do you do when they change? Let's start and hear Kudlow, 2.5.
But the key point today is the blue-collar boom continues. Lower wage gains are much faster than the top managers. Production workers growing at 5%, wages that is.
Blue collar boom. So he's pointing at indicators that say the bottom earners are making more. But what you're saying is that the party not in power is going to say, is it working for you? Even though the numbers kind of show for the majority, maybe it is. So
right. I think the point is this. If you're working and somebody shows up on TV and says, you got a 3% unemployment rate, 3.6, you get 3% wage growth. I can show you this crosstab here, this metric that says a production worker is doing a little better than the manager in terms of some statistic. And assuming those things don't get revised and don't change, the question is, what do you do with that? I think you do one of two things. You either process it and say, well, the team is doing good. Like the country's doing good. I think that's called sociotropic voting in my field. The idea is that, it's almost like saying, hey, we're going to make the playoffs. Our team is great. But the other side of it is, how are you doing? How do you feel? And by the way, people always feel, Adam, that they want more. That's not the issue. The issue is, are you doing life? Do you go to work? Do you come home? Do you pay your bills? Do you get food on the table? Next morning, you get up, you go to work. Are you moving and shaking? Because that's another variable. If you are moving and shaking, even though you think you may need $15 an hour or something more, what tends to happen when election day comes around, the complaints are like surface level. They're like surface level, and you maybe don't even show up at the polls. Oops, I forgot. Why'd you forget? Well, I was over at Kroger's buying this, and now I got to go shopping, and I got to go down and do this. My life is moving and shaking. So there's that factor. That sometimes these economic conditions affect us at a subconscious level, whereas our complaints are kind of just surface level. That's the argument for how a good economy works.
Maybe you won't get out to the polls to vote for Bernie if you have a job.
Right. I mean, it certainly makes it harder to say the sky is falling. You may say, Bernie may say, don't you think you deserve better? And maybe you do deserve better. But it's one thing to say that this is the most consequential election of your life. You've got to go to the polls. Whereas it's hard to do that when everyone's moving and shaking, when the employment is 3.5%, when you're breaking records, and even if you're having trouble paying your bills, you're still in the game. You know what I mean? So that's the issue. Oh, by the way, to hear a argument that is not indicator based, which is more of a real thing, let's hear Kudlow 2.6.
Two biggest assets, stocks and homes. That's what folks own. Ordinary middle-income folks, blue-collar boom type folks, as we call it. They have benefited enormously from the stock market rise and the rise in home prices, the recovery in home prices, so that their consumer household net worth gains have been, I think, 47%, whereas the top 1% only got a 13% gain. I want everyone. I want a rising tide to lift all boats. But I'm just saying these increases in asset prices and consumer wealth are very strong harbingers of a strong economy, particularly on the consumer side.
I happened to just read an article on this. One survey showed that something like the top 1% of households owned about 35% of all stocks and shares. Now, I don't know if that included the, your 401ks are usually based on stocks.
Okay, so it's definitely true what you say, that there's not an equitable distribution of these resources, and that when stock markets go up, it clearly benefits the class that predominates in buying that kind of stuff. The capital stock tends to be
investment class.
Right. But let me just do this to you, okay? Because this is very important. This is exactly what I'm talking about. On the one hand, then what that argument says is the indicators never matter. When stocks go up, we're still going to complain. When property values go up, we're still going to complain. Why? Because the rich is getting too much of that. That's the Bernie argument. Let me give you the other argument. All right, let me give you the other argument. I live here in Wright State. I'm not the country club guy. You know, I mean, I'm as regular as they come from. And what's interesting is I bought a home here in Dayton, and I bought it just a few years ago. And it's like a condo, not quite. It's a homeowners association. And so I have this home, and you know what I bought for it and what it appraises for? There's about $30,000 more in equity right there. And so I go to the bank and I see that. And so I am now walking in life thinking that I have this real wealth. I mean, they call it wealth. It's asset wealth. It's like accounting. For accounting purposes, this is something that's there. Now, what else is happening? I work at Wright State, so there's retirement money taken out, and it goes into a fund. The state fund manages this. Well, when the stocks go up in the way that they go up, those numbers go up. So when I get my report for what my retirement is worth each year, that number is bigger. Here's what I'm trying to tell you. This is not an indicator where someone says, well, the production workers are making, 2% more, 2.5% more in the report on the spreadsheet.
It's unrelatable.
Yeah, this is a relatable thing. It's like you say, oh, my 401k is up. You say, oh, I've got equity now. I could borrow against that if I want to. I can go, So there's all that's like a real thing. So I'm trying to say to you that this isn't an indicator argument. This is something that you can actually point to. Now, again, I don't want to make too much of this because property values can crash. The economy can go into recession. Or what goes up comes down. I mean, but that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about we're talking about simply the political perception of the economy. This is what the subject is. The political perception of the economy, the economic narratives, what the numbers look like, what it means. You are right. And then somebody's going to say, well, the stock markets are only for the rich people. But, there's this other thing that's going on that I'm not a rich person, and I'm seeing something here that is relevant.
So those metrics you actually feel. You see them in your bank account almost, in your 401k, and your value of your home.
Yeah.
And so they actually are really impacting the American people. It's no longer just 3.5% unemployment is great, but it's not directly affecting me.
Right. And so the distinction there would be how the team is doing. If somebody says America has a 3.6% unemployment rate, that's almost like saying, hey, the Steelers are going to make the playoffs this year. You're happy as they think, oh, the team is doing well. But this other thing with the property values and the portfolios that are going up, I think that actually is something that people realize more. It's more personal to them. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to look at more economic stuff. We're going to look at economic growth and some other things.
Politics without allegiance. You're listening to Good Politics with Dr. Wilson and Adam Whiteman.